greening the indirect tax reforms in India. India is at the crossroads in terms of sustainable development. On the one hand, it has registered impressive economic growth along with significant progress in human development in recent years. The country is endowed with rich biodiversity that is protected and conserved through a network of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries and biosphere reserves. On the other hand, the country is witnessing high level of urbanization, bringing with it a plethora of associated environmental problems. High level of industrialization has also brought to the forefront the pollution concerns. Ranipet in Tamil Nadu, Sukinda Valley in Orissa featured among top 10 worst polluted places in the world in 2006 and 2007 respectively. There are equally other pollution hotspots highlighted by these reports all across India.
Now, there has been not any systematic analysis to show how damaging is the environmental pollution being caused by our economic activities, but some earlier estimates show that close to the tune of 4 to 5% of our annual GDP is lost due to the environmental pollution.
The environmental damages are estimated as 4.5% of the country's GDP. Air pollution alone in 50 cities of India is estimated to cause public health damage to the tune of $3 billion per year.
In India, in terms of environmental management, through what is referred as command and control environmental management, wherein the central government or the state government decides about what is the required pollution abatement is at a particular by a particular industry or a particular firm, and prescribes it and expects that particular polluter to abide by that prescribed norm. The command and control system provides little incentive for this differential polluting potentials of the firms. Now, it's widely recognized world over that an appropriate way to handle the pollution problem is to bring in market-based instruments such as taxes and tradable permits.
Since 1990s, developed countries have levied taxes on carbon, fuel, waste disposal in landfills and other emission sources to control pollution and meet environmental targets. Most of the countries adopting environmental tax reforms, ETRs, have been successful in bringing about improvements in environmental quality. Evidence from European Union suggests that ETRs were able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2 to 6% over the last 2 decades compared to the counterfactual reference scenario.
The mixed evidence from all these countries is that the usual concern with the environmental tax reforms is that it could cause to a decline in the growth and also could lead to loss of employment. But the European experience largely shows that neither of this is true. In fact, in case of employment, there is an increase in the employment provided the environmental tax revenue is effectively used for promotion of green activities or green economic activities through which create environmentally sound and environmentally green jobs in the system.
It is well known that when an economy grows at a rate anywhere between 9 to 10%, there will be considerable requirements of energy, electricity and so on, and these things will lead to a high pollution load. In this context, fiscal policy, particularly taxation policy, becomes very important. The Indian economy has gone through a number of reforms such that the old very high tax rate regime with multiple exemptions and a number of rate categories, that is the conventional kind of tax regime that we had, has now been shifting to a system of taxation that is now known as the value added tax.
Let's see the concept of VAT in India through the production of a new dress. Say the value added tax is 10%. When a fabric store sells silk to a tailor with the base cost of rupees 10, he pays a VAT of rupee 1. In total, he pays 11 rupees. Now the tailor sews a dress and sells it to a retailer for 30 rupees with the VAT of rupees 3, in which the tailor gets to subtract the 1 rupee of taxes he had already paid to the fabric store. Finally, the retailer sells the dress to a shopper for 50 rupees with the VAT of 5 rupees, in which the retailer and the tailor already paid 3 rupees. So, the shopper pays 2 rupees to the government. Although more complicated, value-added taxes are considered better than equivalent sales tax, where the tax is levied only when the consumer buys a product. Since companies usually get credit for taxes already paid by their suppliers, companies will pressure other businesses in the production chain to prove they had paid their taxes. That means the system is somewhat self-policing. The GST, which is referred as the last mile of indirect tax reforms, involves deepening of the VAT principle along with uniform taxes on goods and services.
We have a very fragmented system of taxation of goods and services, and as the last mile of reforms of taxation of goods and services, what is now being contemplated is to implement a comprehensive goods and services tax. Now, when we levy a goods and services tax, there are certain implications that have a bearing on environment. In particular, a goods and services tax will have probably just one rate for all goods and services, that is including goods that are polluting as well as those that are non-polluting. And in fact, even in the present regime, certain polluting inputs and outputs are taxed at rates which are higher than other goods. But all this will be merged and will become a single rate.
In order to demonstrate the effectiveness of integrating eco-taxes in the GST framework, a large-scale modelling work was undertaken by Dr. D.K. Srivastava and Dr. K.S. Kavikumar of Madras School of Economics. The work has resulted in publication of 4 technical reports. The main results of the exercise argue in favor of keeping the core rate of GST at 14%, lower than what is being suggested in the policy circles currently. The desired buoyancy comes from the petroleum taxes. The core rate can be further reduced if higher rate is charged on polluting goods and petroleum products.
We provide for environmental considerations in the design of goods and services tax. Then what is important is to somehow differentiate the overall tax burden on polluting inputs and outputs compared to the non-polluting inputs and outputs. Now, important considerations here are goods that are sometimes called sin goods or demerit goods. Within that broad category, what we need to do is to also include polluting inputs and outputs. Up to that common rate, whatever other inputs are used by producers of these products, they should get a rebate on input taxation. But over and above that, they should all be prepared to bear a larger rate of tax, a higher rate of taxation in order to provide the necessary disincentive against the use of these polluting inputs and outputs. This applies both to petroleum products, energy products, as well as other polluting goods like leather, textile, plastics, steel, and so on. So what is needed is that in the design of goods and services tax, now that we are entering into the final phase of reforms, we should be forward looking and we should plan for a reform which would actually anticipate the problems of the future and look into the trade-off between growth and pollution and maintenance of environment in a manner which is adequate and which can sustain growth over the longer period of time.
The idea of greening of the indirect tax reforms can be endorsed, especially by endorsement of the idea by various constitutional bodies, media coverage, endorsement by eminent people,
This study by Dr. Srivastava, Dr. Kavi Kumar and his colleagues makes an important contribution in making the GST regime environment friendly by incorporating the environmental taxes on goods and services. They tell us how to incorporate it, and the suggestion is it should be a non-rebatable type of scheme.
In GST, all taxes on inputs ought to be rebated. But whereas the environmental taxes cannot be rebated, they will have to be treated as non-rebated. And therefore, one has to be design a proper scheme to bring in the environmental taxes in the structure of GST. The study which has been done by several professors at the Madras School of Economics explores in detail the exact modality and the mechanism through which environmental taxes can be blended with the present scheme of GST.
the Center-State Relations Commission, the 13th Finance Commission argued that the taxation of petroleum products and natural gas would be rationalized by including them in the tax base. HSD, MS and ATF could be charged GST and an additional levy by both the central and state governments. No input credit would be available against either CGST or SGST on the additional levy. Such an arrangement would ensure protection of existing revenues while taking care of environmental concerns. GST with eco-taxes will have lower core rate for same revenue target but provide more environment-friendly resource allocation, supporting long-term sustained growth with more acceptability to producing states, thereby a faster implementation to the GST in India. Greening the indirect tax reforms in India.